Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. So, I have a guest I'm really excited about tonight. We're going to talk nonprofits, and I have a nonprofit expert on the line. So, I'm going to bring her on. We're going to talk everything about nonprofits. So, Maureen, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. So, you have experts in nonprofit for years now. You have remind me of what it's called because you just told me like recently. I'm sorry,
Yeah, no problem. So, I'll kind of
it's
give
a
you a little bit
C. Sorry, it's a CNP.
of
So let me.
CNP. So, I'm a certified nonprofit professional. It's kind of a newer certification that's kind of taking over the nonprofit world. I feel like in a world of MBAs that this is a little bit more specific to this type of an industry. And, it just basically shows that you're an expert in your field. But so a little bit about me and kind of how I got into this type of work. Um, I never thought I'd be in nonprofits. I'll be the first to say that. My undergraduate was in graphic design, and I got out of out of college right out about the time the Great Recession was just right before it started to kind of kick off. And I was one of those people that was first hired, first fired, and which put me, looking for, basically any job I could get to try to pay the bills, keep a roof over my head, pay the rent, and, spent my time bartending, serving. And I actually started working at a Goodwill store, again, as kind of like a filler just to make money. But what I kind of learned more about the Goodwill and just nonprofits in general is, really what their type of work that they were doing. So that,
Okay.
the bottom line isn't really profits. It's really how much good you're doing or how many people you're helping. And it kind of gives you a little bit more for fulfillment in the type of work you do, and gives you a better reason to get out of bed every day when you know that what you're doing is actually going to help other people. So,
Right.
to say at the beginning, I was doing it for myself, just to be, to do what I had to do. But, getting a greater sense of purpose, I think, was very fulfilling. And I started to just shift my career. I went back and got more skills in this field. I worked actually at a sorority headquarters for 4 years, and they had a few different nonprofit entities. They had a membership entity, which is a 501c6, and they had a 501c3, which for a foundation. So I got to learn two different types of nonprofits there. And then went back for my.
Well, can we go back real quick? Can you tell the audience the difference between those two? Because
Sure.
I don't know if I understand the difference myself.
Yeah. So what everyone normally thinks of when they think nonprofit is a 501c3,
Yes.
which is a tax deductible, fully, it basically is a tax difference. But you can fully write it off on your taxes however you like. Everything that you put into it is fully deductible. And again, this is what most people think with nonprofits, but there are actually 26 different types of nonprofit organizations. So a 501c6 is a membership organization. There's actually even a specific one for fraternal organizations, which is a little bit slightly different, even though that certainly it sounds like it's very fraternal, which it is. But again, it's all how you designate it when you first set up the organization. And membership organizations are, all over, professional organizations, and those are all 501c6s. So to kind of, I guess, if you want to go the next level, for I guess we're talking a little bit about Yang Gang stuff. We do.
Before we get into Yang Gang stuff, kind of describe for the audience like the kind of things that you do right now.
Sure. So right now, I work for an organization that helps block grant money get out to homeless organizations across the state of Wisconsin. And I work as a grant specialist, and we look at all the different organizations. We take their applications and then manage the funds and make sure that they fulfill the agreements that we have.
Okay.
So I currently work with about $1 million worth of funding, and but looking to probably work with quite a bit more very soon.
So just some background, block grants are from the government, usually federal,
so
federal grants for local organizations.
Yes, so block grants are usually from the federal government,
right.
And they are divvied up usually to states or cities in larger groups, depending on how it's allocated, but it's usually just to solve some sort of problem. And the way that they set it as a block, the federal government really doesn't care how the problem gets solved. They just want to make sure it does get solved. So they give the money to the local organizations to find out a better way to do it, or whatever works best for them.
And it's usually once a year, correct?
Yeah. Sometimes it can be multi-year, but it really depends on the type of grant that it is. So right now, the one that I currently work with, they call them CBG money, and it's for community development. And part of the money we also got was from the CARES Act. So when everyone got their $1,200 check, there was different money that was allocated just to help solve homelessness and prevent homelessness with so many job losses and things like that. So that's pretty much what I do right now.
Well, it sounds like you're going to have lots of great opinions on homelessness, and even we're going to talk a little bit about Andrew Yang, because we kind of did meet through the gang network that we have going on there. But with your background, like I wasn't really in the nonprofit world until a couple of years back, when I got involved with a local community center, and then was finally asked to run it. But I think part of the reason for this channel is I think nonprofits are the balance probably to capitalism, because there's different voices out there that have a lot of problems with capitalism for different reasons. Well, good nonprofits, I feel, is the counterbalance to the capitalism structure, because a lot of times there's a need that is going unfilled, and nonprofits want to step up and fill that need, and not so much because it's profitable, but because of the need out there. With that said, nonprofits still have to market themselves and get money and do different things to that end. But how do you feel the same way in that kind of analysis?
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. So nonprofit world, or they call them the NGO world, non-government organization. They call them really the third sector. That's like the unofficial term for it. So obviously the public sector is driven by capital. Bottom line is to make money. Government is really just to keep everything in theory running and working, and keeping our society held together. And then, like you said, the nonprofit world really kind of just fills gaps, I think. And I think it all comes down to society as a whole. So as we started out, if you want to think really far back, a little bit with sociology, we all started as core families and tribes and that type of thing. And as we grew and started to split off our society more, government was formed, and they had their own rules. And then we started to do other things. We started to pull off schools. We started to pull off, pretty much everything's been separated. We've outsourced our childcare, so now the children aren't in the homes very often, and we do, you just kind of split all these things off, and there's all these holes that end up opening up. So that's where kind of the nonprofit world has kind of emerged. and really has only been like a strengthened core part of our society for maybe the last 100 years or so. In the older days, it was more like the poorhouses, and that's what they considered charities. But as it's kind of been more well developed, I think some of the early ones were probably like the Girl Scouts,
Right.
Red Cross, those types of organizations, and
Yeah.
then they kind of built up, and like I said, 26 different designations of nonprofits have kind of spurred up all over, and
Yeah.
now there's over a million in this country alone of different types.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of nonprofits. I still feel like we kind of rarely hear about nonprofits unless a celebrity is plugging them,
Mhm.
or they do a charity show a lot
Yeah.
of times. But we don't really get to dig into what the nonprofit does, and I'm sure there's a lot of unsung heroes of the nonprofit industry.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's crazy to see how different some of these nonprofits are. I mean, you can have some that are, they're 500,000 plus employees that are all on this branch working under these board structures. But then, there's others that are just completely board run. They don't have any staff, and they're doing whatever they're doing just because out of the good of their heart that they think that that's what they need to be doing. So, yeah.
And I think a lot of times if nonprofits can find a way to be run more like a business, they do better than kind of like a mom and pop type of organization. But so what did you think of Andrew Yang's proposal for UBI and being a member of the Yang Gang, I guess?
Yeah, so when I found Andrew, I guess like many people, just randomly, I was doing volunteer work for the 2018 midterms for the Democratic Party. And maybe it was just something that popped up in my news feed that, Facebook kind of shoved to me. But I saw it as an ad, and it was, so I guess I was probably one of his earlier adopters, but I saw it as an ad. And like most people, it was like, who's this Asian guy running for president?
Right.
It's kind of a joke, but sat there for like 2 hours, went to his website, watched all his videos, and he didn't have a whole lot at that time. It was only a couple of like one, random video and a couple of obscure podcasts. But, I just started to I didn't know what universal basic income was at the time, to be honest. And it really intrigued me. So I ended up reading Annie Lowry's book, Give People Money.
Okay.
And that kind of, it just filled in a lot of holes in my head of like, if we did this, then we could solve so many different problems. And, again, from being from a nonprofit background, and I was actually in grad school at the time, I just couldn't get over the shaking feeling like we could just be doing so much more with if we gave everyone money, and just instead of trying to build all these programs up and try to tell people what they need to do and to jump through all these hoops to try to get the help that they need, we could just give them the money and they could figure out what they need in their own lives, which was highly attractive to me. I mean, I'm not saying I want to be outforced of a job because I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I would love to see a lot of these social problems just straight up solved. Like, we don't really actually have to have hunger. We don't have to have homelessness. These are things that could be solved relatively easy if we just gave people the money to do what they need to do. And homelessness, it would be very simple for 3 or 4 homeless people to get together and just start roommate, like a roommate situation. And right there, they would have more than enough to pay rent each month. And then, depending on how they wanted to do it, they could figure it out.
Yeah. And if they had to kick one person out because they're not paying, well, that person still has money next month.
Exactly. And they can figure out from there. So, I mean, that right there would just solve a huge issue with what I work with every single day.
So with what you work with right now, what kind of solutions are people looking to provide right now? And why do you think are they falling short? I assume they're falling short. What do you think about that?
Honestly, COVID has been very interesting. So a lot of the homeless shelters that I work with, they have had to reduce their services because obviously they're trying to keep the populations in their shelters down, which is horrible. But luckily it was summertime, so they weren't, I live where it's very cold. So they weren't out on the streets, but it is starting to get cold now, and it's, the virus is still just raging away. Like, we haven't done anything about it. Cases in our state are out of control, and I think we're in the top 4 now. But it's scary. So now we're going back, and nothing has really been done. And for homelessness, all you do is you basically are just putting Band-Aids on the problem. You're not solving anything. We're just keeping these people from, the next bout of homelessness. We do have the programs that do help. So a lot of times they work with the local cities. They have certain landlords that they know. But we have a lot of case managers that work with these, basically looking at what these each individual case is, whether they have children or they are working or they don't work, or whatever the situation might be, and finding the programs that they qualify for and really helping them to get to that next step so they have permanent housing.
Yeah, and that's something Andrew talked about on the trail. Like, that's what we do now, is we try to figure out what resources we can apply to these people, and try to match them up. And how much easier would it be to just be like, well, you have your $1,000 a month, so you don't have to, a lot of time and effort would be solved if we could just have that resource to match people up to.
Yeah. And I think it would just be easier to, if it was very temporary, like, so you only needed a little bit of time there because you had your money. Maybe you needed to stay there for a month to like consolidate or get maybe $2,000 under your belt. So that way you have enough for, a security deposit or something like that. But it would be a lot less chronic homelessness. You know what I mean? Like, once you kind of got out of you spent your short term there, we could help you get out of it and move on and hopefully get stable again, which, helps to build once you have a home. And that's, one of the most basic things you need for, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
Once you get the housing out of then you can start to work on the next level. You have food security. Do you have a job? Which, again, if you had UBI, it would be up to however you wanted to spend your money. Maybe you wanted a job, maybe you didn't want a job, but whatever, if you can make it work, then that's up to you.
Right.
But at least you could start to have more peace of mind. Mental health would get better, and all these other things. But getting that homelessness out of the way, I think, is a huge one, where you don't have to worry about every single day, where am I going to sleep tonight? So
do you think that's ultimately the solution then, is universal basic income to end homelessness someday? Is that pretty much all we got?
I have not found anything better than UBI. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I think with nonprofits, we have to think more root problems. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times we're always just putting, like I kind of mentioned, Band-Aids, but we're always putting Band-Aids on things and putting out fires as they come. But if you really want to solve something, you just want to get to the root of the problem and solve it and call it a day. And that's the whole point of most of these nonprofits, is you have a mission and you're supposed to work on the solution to that mission. Sometimes they're ongoing missions and they'll always be ongoing, but there are many of these things that are solution-based, such as homelessness, that you can just solve. And I have not found a better solution than UBI. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you think in general nonprofits can do to be, I guess, more successful, get more funding? I mean, the government provides the block grant once a year. Obviously, nonprofits try to do budgets to make sure that they're getting the money they need, but
Mhm.
a lot of nonprofits sometimes apply to just the block grant and then are in trouble because of certain not having enough funding. So what do you think they can do to get more funding, or do they need to like sell t-shirts and hats and things like
Yeah.
that? What do you
Well,
think?
yeah, I mean, everyone's different. Some won't be able to apply for grant money because that's just not the type of nonprofit that they are. But I think no matter what kind of nonprofit you are, I think for fundraising purposes, you really have to just make sure that you are telling a great story.
Mhm.
Most people don't, or most nonprofits don't know how to tell their story, why they exist, and what really drives them. They're good at telling people what they do, but they don't really tell them why they do it. And I think that's, it kind of goes back to like a Simon Sinek thing of like,
Yeah, I was gonna say Simon Sinek. Yeah.
but it's very true in this type of industry. Like people get so into what they're doing, they forget to, why they do it. And being able to tell that story really helps to drive people's emotions, to help them give. And I think nonprofits because of, again, with the history, when people think nonprofit, they think charity, and that's not exactly it at all. A lot of the times once people got that sort of mindset of that's what a nonprofit is, oh, it's a charity, and you're just, giving money away and giving things away. It's not really what nonprofits tend to be doing. Some of them do that, but most of them don't. So it's almost like a rebranding has to happen, and each group has to know how to do that, which many of them don't have the funding to do that. So a lot of, like I said, like a best practice for nonprofits when it comes to kind of having that good balance of a proper operating cost and everything to kind of make sure that you can, pay your staff and keep the lights on and all that kind of stuff. Is about 35% of your overall funding for the year, and there can be some wiggle room in there, but that's kind of like a good baseline. So if you have about 35% of operating cost, the rest can tend to go towards your mission, your fundraising, everything else you might need to do to make sure that you're really getting the mission and your programs and all the things that you're going to do to be successful. So for fundraising purposes, I mean, I think you really need to kind of look at what you want to do first. What type of, what are you going to do to solve your problem, what are your mission, or achieve your mission, and what do you really, just it needs to be budgeted out the same way as you would have a successful business. You look at all the costs it's going to cost you. What staff do we need to do or to have to attain this? Do you have to have a marketing team or a PR team, which, depending on the size that you are, maybe one person will be able to do it, or can your executive director do it? That type of thing. But you have to look at the people you have, the skill sets you have. Do we have volunteers that could do these things to take some of the costs away? Or just do it as a part-time basis or consultant basis. I think a lot of people need to really, nonprofits are pretty savvy, but the really good ones know how to stretch the talent they have in the different areas that they have.
Well, that's one of the things that nonprofits can capitalize on that profit companies can't, are volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all about attracting them. And profit companies use interns instead of volunteers.
So we can do that too. So
Yeah.
that's also a really great option, and definitely have done it in the past. But I mean, basically the biggest difference is instead of having at the end of the year a dividend and your profit shares get paid out and things like that, that money just gets all rolled right back into the nonprofit for the next year's. So that could go into next year's operating budget. It could go into a different program. If it was allocated certain ways, it could go into long-term protected money, so that way, if there's a specific project or a building fund or something like that, all that could be put in those different funds and pots. So I think it's you really just have to have a really great budget and know what you need and just go for it. I think a lot of groups, they just get into the weeds of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, so they don't always have the time to get that big picture thinking and just really make it happen and be strategic of what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Well, when I think of like Goodwill and like March of Dimes, I don't know, um, the Christmas one, Salvation Army thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think of the like kind of the big wig, or the Red Cross is another
Mm-hmm.
one. Big wig, nonprofits. A lot of times, some they get a lot of donors, but they also get a lot of, they pay their people like on the board, and a lot of money also, and sometimes there's pushback for paying kind of corporate positions too much. But working for Goodwill, I mean, how do they operate, that you can tell us, between like smaller nonprofits?
Yeah,
Because
so
it feels like they don't have to really worry about donations so much. Plus, Goodwill has a store and they make a lot of money.
yeah, so that's pretty much their main fundraising is the store, and everyone finds a different way to do it. I'm sure in your local area there's little thrift shops and that kind of thing, but they might be helping an animal shelter or whatever it might be. But they found like a funding structure that works for them. So for Goodwill specifically, there's Goodwill International, which is like the corporate one that everyone thinks about. But most of them are actually broken up into regional entities or city entities. And each of them kind of run, for the most part, a little separately, but they all kind of have that same sort of almost like a franchise type feel, like you would have like with a McDonald's. So there's the core of what they're going to do is they're raising funds for job training. That's the core of what they do.
Okay.
They do it usually through a retail store, and that's how they raise the money to do that. But then there might be other services that region needs that, as a separate program, the Goodwill might do that program as well to try to help it, whatever that need might be.
Okay.
For ours, I mean, I worked in the greater Milwaukee area, and it was actually Chicago and Milwaukee was part of the same region.
Okay.
And that was pretty much we just worked on jobs training because the people in those regions, it's very metropolitan areas. And
Right.
compared to, here in Madison, where I'm at now, it's not quite as they don't need jobs as heavy here as they did in Milwaukee and Chicago, with a lot of more urban type people.
And it's more than just training them to work at like a store then, or is it?
So it really depends. So some of them, they have a formal management training program and you can work at the stores, but they actually have jobs training centers of their own. And they would bring in different types of, they would have seminars for them. They would be able to, if they needed clothes to go to interviews, they would give them vouchers so they could actually shop the stores. They would have time to sit on the computers, fill out applications. If they needed extra training to get like their GED, they would help them, get their, get the resources they would need to do that. So, there was a lot of different options. One of the like side programs, if there was a family that might have lost their home in fire or, some other disaster, they would give them vouchers to shop the stores and that type of thing, just help to rebuild their lives. And so that was more just for that region I worked in. But, again, that's a side program that they thought there was a need and they could help fill that need.
Well, I feel like they might be working overtime during Corona time.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So, it's the same thing, trying to for my organization, you know, I I find it interesting because there's a lot of things I took from to try to, put the structure. And Goodwill is one of those kind of companies that I looked at because they do drop training and they do want to employ people. And
Mhm.
that's what I was looking at when I started American Jobs Factory. And it's still I'm still building it, so it's nowhere near Goodwill,
Mhm.
definitely. But my why basically was, well, what I wanted to do is create jobs for the future that don't destroy us, kind of. And that was even before I found Andrew Yang.
Mhm.
So right now, with 60 million jobs being taken away, I feel like we do need good organizations that will build jobs. And because most jobs are so focused on capitalism and focused on profit, more to the point, that it's not always the best idea for our culture to be focused so much on profit. Um,
Mhm.
Obviously you also need money. So, I mean, I have a certain way of, facilitating that money. But what do you think of the job market right now, as we, possibly rebuild America at this point? Do you think nonprofits have a role to play, or do you think nonprofits can heal America?
So I definitely think that they have a role. I wouldn't say that they are the end all to be all. I definitely think that a lot of for-profits, such as maybe yourself, trying to find a different way to really make that transition help people, I think is vital. Um, so I apologize if my 3-year-old her is in the
All
background,
right. Just
but
appreciate you being here.
yeah. The so I would say probably I think that for the job market, we really don't know all the different jobs that we're going to need, but we know like there's definitely going to be certain core things that we're going to need. And I think that depending on how public policy gets pushed in the next couple years, we'll definitely see which way the wind's going to kind of go. Whether you know we have more of a if we stick with more Republican policies and the way things are kind of going now, we're definitely going to, I think nonprofits are really going to have to step up even more than they already are to kind of, again, fill the gaps and help people out because, we're not getting any stimulus checks. We don't have UBI. There's all these things that people are really going to be hurting. And they're, to my knowledge, there's no plans for any sort of job trainings on the masses to really get people where they need to be. If we have more of a progressive agenda and we get more progressives into office, we might get a Green New Deal, which would have a whole slew of new jobs possibly going through with green energy and climate change. Well, and everything they were trying to package into that. So infrastructure and internet, you know, high-speed internet for more rural areas and all those sort of things. So there's a lot of job possibilities there. But
Well,
I do
that's
think
kind
that
of what I'm looking at. Like, Republicans and Democrats, I think, can agree that we need infrastructure
oh
and we
yeah.
need high-speed internet. So, I mean, for that, either a company is going to swoop in that sees that they can exploit a lot of workers and make a lot of money, or we're going to have organizations that have people in mind first
Mhm.
and are trying to get the best for workers, in whatever economy of the future. But we know that someday that big moves are going to come for infrastructure. Big moves are going to come for internet. It's sooner than later, is what I can imagine. So I'm looking, specifically to be in a position to be on the front end of helping that kind of change happen. So
Yeah, and I know Andrew has talked about how the pandemic has sped up automation, but
right.
I think it's also shown where the holes really are in our society. So like we have all these, we're talking just internet alone. there are many schools and there's children who just don't have access to doing virtual learning so that they're
Right.
safe. And so schools are trying to come up with all these different things. And I saw one on the news just a couple days ago that they were retrofitting buses with high-speed internet and sending them out into the rural areas so that the kids could actually, do their homework, and which I thought was very innovative, but it was definitely not something that you would have ever thought that was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the 5G, I don't know, back and forth that if it's harmful for you or if it's okay.
Yeah.
And that's going to have to play out. There's, people that are adamantly against it, but obviously if you don't have internet, you can't get online to be with classmates.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pushback too that people say, that you don't need internet. I'm like, I don't really know anything I could do in my life. I couldn't do my job professionally if I didn't have internet. And I'm sure there are many, many people that feel the same way. And not just your job, but also like your getting services. I mean, again, with a lot of downtowns of all these rural areas getting kind of taken over by one conglomerate like Walmart, or the only way they can get services is if they get shipping from Amazon. It's making it harder and harder for these places. And if you don't have internet access, just getting basic things that you need might be very hard. And, people order prescriptions online and all sorts of stuff now. And these are like basic services you have to run your household. It's not just a luxury item anymore. It's a utility, and we need it, just like you would in the old days having a telephone for emergencies and things like that. It is the communication of today, and I think that not having it really again shows the rich or the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. Well, with COVID, for sure. I mean, there's definitely things that, if you didn't have internet, you couldn't do even, well, getting groceries is one. Lot more people have to stay at home and get those kind of packages. Amazon and all of those, and even Zoom is, blowing up during this time because people are really realizing how valuable those kind of services are. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess even in urban areas with the same sort of access, kids are going to McDonald's or, Taco Bell and spending $1 just so they can sit there and do their homework. And this was going on even before the pandemic.
Yes,
I think
true.
It's very, across the spectrum, you really have to know that these things are needed. And so, so back to, I guess, the Green New Deal. We kind of went on but
I would think, I mean, if I would think schools would offer like Wi-Fi in their parking lots and have, kids, have their parents drive them and do homework in the car or something during this time. But I mean, it's a crazy time. And I still think someday we will have virtual reality school where people will just put on their glasses or whatever and hang out with their friends, virtual before they go into class. So, I mean, that's coming. And this whole situation could definitely be speeding that along for sure.
Yeah, and just other infrastructure. I mean, we know that our roads are crumbling, our bridges most of them are deemed unsafe. I mean, we look at Minneapolis a couple years ago and having a major freeway just collapse because it was just so old. And that wasn't even the worst of some of the ones that they have out there that are technically in operation now. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of different skills that are going to be needed. From skilled laborers to engineers. Across the board. It's really going to be interesting to see what types of jobs will come out of this, if it ever goes through. But also just how life is changing. I saw another video today about a Tesla guy who had retrofitted his car for, he paid the extra $8,000 to have it fully automated, and he was letting the car drive himself down the interstate. So again, I think about my daughter. I mean, she might never even need to drive a car if self-driving cars get implemented the same way that smartphones did in a decade. So I mean, most people.
Yeah, it'll be like back in my day, I had to drive my own car.
Yeah, which is going to sound so silly, but that might be her reality, and it might be totally different a decade from now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we pretty much covered everything. So, are you having people connect to you?
Yeah, so
For
I'm
your
happy to talk to anybody who really wants to know more about nonprofits.
Okay.
Feel free to reach out to me. I can give Daniel my email and he can put it in his comments. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open. Definitely looking to help as many people as I can in as many different industries as well. I mean, I really feel that although I work right now with homelessness, I definitely have skills to help a lot of different industries. And yeah, definitely just happy to help. And I'm always here in the Yang Gang to make the world a better place, like most of us are. So I think that's what brings us all together anyways, is we see that it can be better and we want it to be better. So yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I will put maybe your LinkedIn profile in the
Sounds good.
comments down below when we get to that. So thank you so much for coming on tonight, talking nonprofits with me. One thing I want to say, the funny thing that Andrew Yang always says is that he thought Trump would at least get infrastructure together, because he talked about that. Like, that's the one thing that Republicans and Democrats can agree on. And he didn't even do that. So
yeah, that is true.
It's pretty frustrating, but we will see what happens coming up November 3rd to see which direction our country goes in.
As we all vote, I think, is the number one thing.
Yeah, we gotta do our American duty here and at least get out the vote. And then organizations like mine will be on the forefront of creating jobs for the future and rebuilding this pandemic stricken world. And thank you so much, Maureen, for joining me tonight. And everyone else, have a great night and take care.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.